The letter arrived on a morning so cold that frost had painted intricate patterns across the oaken door of the stone cottage, and Grisha stared at the sealed parchment as though it might bite her. She had taken her vow of silence 3 months prior, standing before the clan elders with her head held high and her jaw set in determination, swearing not to speak for a full year as penance for the lives she had taken in battle. The human soldiers had been young, barely more than boys, and though the raid had been sanctioned by her chieftain, though she had only done what was expected of a warrior, their faces haunted her dreams. So she had chosen silence, a year without words to honor the dead and seek whatever peace her conscience might find. Now this stranger, this human man whose farm bordered the western edge of Orc territory, had apparently decided that her silence was an invitation rather than a barrier. Grisha turned the letter over in her hands, her green fingers careful not to tear the wax seal. She had been living alone in this cottage for the past 3 months, a small dwelling her clan had built for her at the edge of their lands, so that her silence would not burden the communal life of the settlement. They brought her food once a week, left it at her door without ceremony, and otherwise let her tend the small garden and chop firewood and exist in her self-imposed isolation. The cottage sat in a meadow where Orc territory met unclaimed wilderness, and beyond that wilderness lay the scattered human farms that had been slowly encroaching on these lands for the past decade. She had seen the human man exactly once, 4 weeks ago, when she had been gathering medicinal herbs near the stream that marked the informal boundary between their peoples. He had been watering his horse on the opposite bank, a tall figure with dark hair and a weathered face that spoke of hard work and harder winters. Their eyes had met across the water, and instead of the fear or hatred she expected, she had seen only curiosity in his brown eyes. He had nodded to her, a simple acknowledgement of one person to another, and she had nodded back before retreating into the forest. Apparently, that single exchange had been enough to embolden him. Grisha broke the seal and unfolded the letter, the parchment crisp and clean. The handwriting was neat, each letter formed with care. To the Orc woman in the stone cottage, it began. My name is Marcus Aldrich, and I farm the land west of the boundary stream. I have seen you once, and though we did not speak, I found myself thinking of you afterward. I know your people and mine have little love for each other, and I know the dangers in even writing this letter. But I have always been a fool for curiosity, and I find myself wondering about the woman who lives alone in the meadow. If you would like to tell me to leave you in peace, you need only leave this letter torn in half on the stone by the stream. If you are willing to receive another letter, leave a stone atop this one. I will understand either way. With respect, Marcus Aldrich. Grisha read the letter 3 times, her heart doing something complicated and uncomfortable in her chest. She should tear it in half. She should tear it into pieces so small they could never be reassembled and scatter them to the wind. She was in the middle of a sacred vow, and this human had no business intruding on her penance. More than that, any connection between an Orc and a human was forbidden by both their peoples. Her clan would be furious if they discovered this correspondence, and the humans would likely be worse. Yet she found herself thinking of the man's face across the stream, the simple respect in his nod. Found herself remembering how lonely these months of silence had been, how strange it felt to go so long without any real human or Orc connection. Letters were not speaking, after all. Her vow had been specific. She would not speak for a year. She had said nothing about reading or writing. It was a technicality that her conscience recognized as the dangerous rationalization it was. But Grisha had always had a contrary streak, a tendency to push against rules even as she honored them. It was part of what had made her a good warrior and a difficult daughter. 2 days later, she walked to the stream and placed a smooth river stone atop the folded letter, which she had left tucked into a crack in the large boulder that sat at the water's edge. Then she returned to her cottage and tried not to think about what she had done. The second letter arrived 4 days after that. Grisha found it tucked under the same stone, the first letter gone. This time the wax seal bore a simple pressed mark, the letter M. To the orc woman, Marcus had written, and she could almost hear warmth in the written words. Thank you for the stone. I confess I checked that boulder 3 times before I saw it, and when I did, I smiled for the first time in weeks. Winter has been hard this year. I lost 6 sheep to a mountain cat, and my closest neighbor is 5 miles away. The silence here can be heavy. I imagine you understand that, living as you do. I should tell you something of myself, I suppose, so you know who presumes to write to you. I am 28 years old, and I have been working this farm for 6 years. Before that, I was a soldier, which you may find ironic or troubling given that I am writing to an orc woman. I left that life because I grew tired of being told who to hate and who to fear. The land does not ask such things of me. It only asks for work and patience. I wonder what brought you to live alone at the edge of your clan's territory. I wonder if you are there by choice or necessity. I wonder many things, but I will not press. Write back if you wish or do not. Either way, I am glad to have met you, even across a stream. Marcus. Grisha sat on her doorstep and read the letter until the words blurred. A former soldier. She should hate him on principle. But his words carried no malice, only a straightforward honesty that she found disarming, and he had been right, the silence was heavy. She had chosen it, had embraced it as necessary, but that did not make it easy. She went inside and found parchment and ink, supplies she had brought with her for recording her thoughts during this year of penance. Her handwriting was less refined than his, the letters more angular, but she wrote carefully. Marcus Aldrich, I am Grisha. I cannot speak for reasons I will not explain, but I can write. You are not the first soldier I have encountered, and the fact that you left that life speaks better of you than continuing it would have. I am here because I chose to be, though choice and necessity are sometimes difficult to separate. I killed men in battle, your countrymen. They were young and probably someone's sons, and I have decided to honor their deaths with silence. This may seem foolish to you. It may seem like too little or too much. But it is what I can do. If this knowledge makes you wish to stop writing, I will understand. If it does not, I will read what you send. Grisha. She hesitated before sealing the letter, wondering if her honesty had been too brutal, too raw. But she had never been good at deception, and if this correspondence was to continue, it needed to be built on truth. She left the letter at the stone that evening, tucked it carefully into the crack, and walked back to her cottage without looking behind her. 3 days passed. Then 4. Grisha told herself she did not care whether he wrote back, that she had expected him to be frightened off by her confession. She told herself this even as she found excuses to walk near the stream, checking the boulder from a distance. On the 5th day, there was a letter. Grisha. Thank you for your honesty. I will match it with my own. I killed orcs in battle. 3 that I know of, perhaps more. I was told they were monsters, savages who would slaughter us all given the chance. Then one day I looked at the face of an orc warrior I had just run through with my sword, and I saw the same surprise and pain I had seen on human faces. I saw a person dying. I left the army 2 months later. So you see, we are both trying to live with what we have done. I do not think your silence is foolish. I think it shows a conscience that many soldiers, orc or human, never develop. I would like to continue writing to you if you are willing. Tell me about your clan. Tell me what your life was like before you came to the cottage. I want to know you. Marcus. Something in Grisha's chest unknotted just slightly. She wrote back that same evening, and this time her letter was longer. She told him about growing up in the clan, the daughter of a warrior mother and a hunter father. She told him about learning to fight, about the pride she had felt the first time she had been allowed to join a raid. She told him about the communal fires and the songs her people sang, about the way her younger brother could always make her laugh no matter how serious she tried to be. Marcus's next letter told her about his childhood in a small human village, about parents who had died of fever when he was 16. He told her about joining the army because he had no other prospects, about slowly realizing that the enemies he fought were not so different from him. He told her about buying this farm with his saved wages, about the satisfaction of planting seeds and watching them grow. Winter deepened, and the letters continued. Twice a week, sometimes 3 times, Grisha would walk to the boulder and find a new letter waiting. Twice a week, she would write back, her responses growing longer and more detailed as the weeks passed. Marcus wrote about his daily life, the struggles with frozen ground, the small victories of keeping his animals healthy through the cold, the books he read by firelight. Grisha wrote about her garden preparations for spring, about the meditations she practiced during her silence, about memories from her warrior days. He made her laugh, which should not have been possible through written words alone. He told her ridiculous stories about his attempts to fix his barn roof, about a chicken that had decided the horse's stall was a better sleeping place than the coop, about the time he had accidentally trapped himself in his own root cellar. She found herself smiling as she read, found herself thinking of clever responses, found herself waiting for his letters with an anticipation that had nothing to do with boredom and everything to do with genuine connection. In one letter he wrote, "I have been thinking about the absurdity of our situation. We are conducting what is essentially a courtship, though I know that is a presumptuous word to use, and yet we have only seen each other once. We have never spoken. You have taken a vow of silence, and I respect a boundary between our peoples that could get us both killed. By any reasonable standard, this is madness. And yet I find myself caring about whether your winter stores are adequate, worrying about whether you are warm enough in that cottage, looking forward to your letters more than I have looked forward to anything in years. Is this madness? Yes. Do I intend to stop? No." Grisha's response was careful but honest. "It is madness, but I have found that the most meaningful things in life often are. I care whether your livestock survive the winter. I worry about you working alone in freezing conditions. I think about you more than is wise. My vow has 4 more months to run. After that, I do not know what happens, but I know that your letters have made this silence bearable in a way nothing else has." Spring arrived gradually, the snow melting in patches, the streams swelling with runoff. Grisha's clan members noticed that she seemed less burdened when they brought her supplies, that there was a lightness in her step that had been absent in the early months of her vow. They attributed it to time passing, to the healing work of silence and solitude. They did not think to look for hidden letters, or to wonder why she walked to the stream so often. Marcus's letters grew more personal as the weather warmed. He admitted that he was lonely on his farm, that he had tried to court a human woman from the nearest village the year before, but she had wanted nothing to do with a farmer who lived so close to orc territory. He confessed that he sometimes wondered if he had made a mistake, isolating himself so thoroughly from his own people. But then he wrote, "And then I think of the alternative, living somewhere crowded and safe, married to someone I do not truly connect with, spending my days pretending that the world is simpler than it is. I chose this isolation because I wanted freedom from expectations. I did not realize how lonely freedom could be until I had it. Your letters have changed that. I am still isolated, but I am no longer lonely. Is that a presumptuous thing to say? Probably. I find I do not care. Grisha wrote back. It is not presumptuous. Or if it is, then I am equally guilty because I feel the same. Before the letters, I was alone. Now I am solitary but not isolated. There is a difference. You have become the voice in my head that comments on everything I do. I imagine what you would say about the fox that steals from my garden, about the way the sunrise looks over the meadow. I compose letters to you in my mind even when I am not writing. You have become part of how I see the world. In early spring, Marcus wrote, I want to see you again. Not just across a stream, but close enough to truly look at each other. Close enough that you could hear me if you were permitted to speak, though I know you are not. I know this is dangerous. I know it violates every reasonable boundary, but I think about it constantly. If you are willing, meet me at the boulder on the first warm evening of spring. We do not have to speak. We do not even have to stay long. I just want to be in your presence again. If you are not willing, I will understand, but I had to ask. Grisha's hands shook as she read the letter. This was different from written correspondence. This was a physical meeting, a crossing of lines that could not be uncrossed. If her clan discovered it, she would be exiled. If his people found out, he could be killed. And yet she wanted it with an intensity that frightened her. She wrote simply, the first warm evening, I will be there. 3 days later, the temperature rose above freezing for the first time in months, and the sun set in a blaze of orange and pink. Grisha walked to the boulder as the light faded, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. She wore her simplest clothing, practical leather pants and a wool tunic, and her dark hair was pulled back in a practical braid. She was very aware of her green skin, her small tusks, the pointed tips of her ears. She was very aware that she was an orc woman about to meet a human man in secret. Marcus was already there, standing beside the boulder with his hands in his pockets. He looked much as he had the first time she saw him, tall and lean with dark hair that fell past his collar, weathered skin that spoke of outdoor work, brown eyes that held both intelligence and kindness. He smiled when he saw her, a slow, warm smile that made her stomach do something complicated. They stood on opposite sides of the stream, neither speaking. Grisha could not speak, and Marcus seemed to understand that breaking the silence with words would somehow cheapen the moment. Instead, he simply looked at her, and she looked back, and in that mutual gaze, something shifted. This was not just letters anymore. This was real and physical and dangerous and absolutely undeniable. Marcus crossed the stream, stepping from stone to stone until he stood on her side of the water. Grisha's breath caught. He was close enough now that she could see the exact color of his eyes, the small scar on his chin, the way his hands trembled slightly as he pulled them from his pockets. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of parchment, held it out to her. Grisha took it, unfolded it, and read by the last light of sunset. I want you to know that I understand what you are risking by being here. I understand what I am risking. I also want you to know that these months of letters have been the best part of my life in longer than I can remember. You are extraordinary, Grisha. Not just because you are an orc woman who would correspond with a human man, but because you are thoughtful and honest and funny and brave. I meant what I said in my letters. This is a courtship, however strange and impossible. When your vow ends, when you can speak again, I want to hear your voice. I want to know if it matches the voice I have imagined from your words, and I want to ask you, out loud, if you might consider a future that includes both of us. I know how insane that sounds. I know the obstacles. But I have never been very good at taking the safe path. Think about it. That is all I ask. Grisha looked up from the letter to find Marcus watching her intently. She could not speak, but she could act. Slowly, deliberately, she reached out and took his hand. His skin was warm against hers, calloused from farm work, and his fingers curled around hers with careful strength. They stood like that as the stars came out, holding hands across the boundary between their peoples, saying nothing and saying everything. When they finally parted, Grisha walked back to her cottage in a daze. She sat at her small table and wrote a letter by candlelight, her hand moving across the parchment with fierce certainty. Marcus. Yes. When my vow ends, yes. I do not know how we will manage it. I do not know what it will cost us. But yes, I want that future. I want to hear your voice and have you hear mine. I want conversations that are not limited to ink and paper. I want to hold your hand in daylight instead of stolen twilight. Yes. She left the letter at the boulder before dawn, and when she returned that evening there was a single wildflower lying atop a new letter. The letter said only, "I am smiling so wide my face hurts. We will figure out how, together." The remaining months of Grisha's vow passed in a strange liminal space. She and Marcus continued their correspondence, but now the letters were supplemented by brief evening meetings at the boulder. Never longer than an hour, always in twilight or darkness, always silent except for the rustle of clothing and the soft sounds of the stream. They learned each other through touch and presence, the way he would brush her hair back from her face, the way she would trace the scar on his chin, the comfortable silence that settled between them. Spring turned to early summer, and Grisha began counting down the days until her vow would end. 50 days, 40 days, 30 days. The anticipation was almost unbearable, and then, 23 days before the year was complete, everything fell apart. Grisha's younger brother Rakhar came to visit the cottage, which was unusual. Her clan generally left her alone except for weekly supply deliveries. But Rakhar had always been close to her, had always ignored rules that seemed arbitrary, and he showed up one morning with fresh bread and concern on his green-skinned face. She smiled at him and gestured for him to sit, made tea in her small kitchen while he sprawled in her only comfortable chair. He talked about clan politics, about the spring raids being planned against human settlements to the south, about their mother's health. Grisha listened and nodded and occasionally wrote brief notes when clarification was needed. Then Rakhar said, casually, "There are rumors about a human farmer near the western border. They say he has been seen walking to the boundary stream at odd hours. They say he might be scouting our territory. The war band thinks they should investigate." Grisha went very still. Rakhar was watching her carefully, his yellow eyes too knowing. "Sister," he said quietly, "if there were something you needed to tell me, something about this human farmer, now would be the time." Grisha's mind raced. She could deny everything, could feign ignorance, but Rakhar knew her too well and she had never been good at lying to him. She grabbed her parchment and wrote quickly, "Leave him alone. He is no threat. Please, Rakhar." Her brother read the note and his face went carefully neutral. "Grisha, tell me you have not been consorting with a human," she wrote. "I have been corresponding with him, letters only." It was not quite a lie. The letters had come first and they were still the bulk of their relationship. "Letters only," Rakhar repeated flatly. "Do you understand what will happen if the clan finds out? Do you understand that they will exile you at best? That they might declare you a traitor and execute you?" Grisha wrote frantically. "My vow ends in 23 days. After that I am leaving. You do not have to be involved. But please do not let them hurt him. He is a good man." Rakhar stood and paced her small cottage, his hands clenched into fists. "A good man. A human man. Grisha, this is insane. You are throwing away everything, your place in the clan, your honor, possibly your life for someone you have been writing letters to," she wrote. "Yes." The single word sat between them, absolute and unyielding. Rakhar stared at her, his expression cycling through anger and disbelief and something that might have been pain. "I cannot protect you from this," he said finally. "If the war band goes after him, if they discover your involvement, I cannot stop what will happen." Grisha wrote, "I am not asking you to protect me. I am asking you to warn me if they plan to move against him. Give me that much." Rakhar looked at the note for a long time, then he nodded once, sharp and reluctant. "I will try. But Grisha, you need to be ready to run, both of you. Because if this becomes known, running will be your only option." After he left, Grisha sat very still, her mind working through possibilities. 23 days was too long to wait. If the war band was already suspicious, if they were planning to investigate Marcus, then she and he needed to act now. But breaking her vow early would bring its own consequences. Her conscience, her sense of honor, her whole purpose in taking the vow in the first place, all of it, would be compromised if she spoke before the year was complete. She thought about the young soldiers she had killed, the ones whose deaths had driven her to silence. She thought about what they would want if they could speak from beyond death. Would they want her to maintain an arbitrary timeline at the cost of another life? Would they want her to sacrifice Marcus to prove a point about penance? No. She thought they probably would not. She thought her penance had been about learning to value life, about understanding the weight of what she had taken. And if that was true, then the right thing to do was to protect life now, even if it meant breaking her vow early. Decision made, Grisha grabbed parchment and wrote a quick letter explaining the situation. She pulled on her cloak and walked to the boulder, left the letter in their usual spot, and then did something she had never done before. She crossed the stream and kept walking toward Marcus's farm. The western lands were rolling hills dotted with sheep and the occasional stand of trees. Marcus's farm sat in a small valley, a neat homestead with a stone house, a barn, and several outbuildings. Grisha approached cautiously, aware that she was violating yet another boundary by coming here in daylight, by approaching his home directly. Marcus was repairing a fence near the barn when she arrived. He looked up at the sound of her footsteps and froze, his expression cycling through surprise and joy and worry in quick succession. He dropped his hammer and walked toward her quickly. "Grisha, what is wrong?" She held up a hand, shook her head, pointed to her mouth, and then made a negating gesture. He understood she still could not speak, but her presence here in daylight at his farm said enough about the urgency of the situation. Marcus led her to his house, ushered her inside. The interior was simple but comfortable, rough furniture, a large fireplace, shelves lined with books. He gestured for her to sit at his table and brought her parchment and ink without being asked. He knew her well enough by now to understand what she needed. Grisha wrote out everything: Rakhar's visit, the war band's suspicions, the danger Marcus was in. She wrote about her decision to break her vow early if necessary, about her belief that protecting him was more important than maintaining her silence. She wrote, "We need to leave, both of us. If we stay, they will come, and I cannot guarantee your safety." Marcus read the letter twice, his expression growing graver with each pass. When he finished, he set it down and looked at her. "You would break your vow for me," he said quietly. It was not a question. Grisha nodded once, firm and certain. "And you would leave your clan, your people, everything you have known." Another nod. Marcus reached across the table and took both her hands in his. "Grisha, are you sure? Because once we do this, there is no going back. We will both be exiles. We will have to go somewhere far from here, somewhere neither of our peoples can easily find us. It will be hard." Grisha grabbed the parchment and wrote, "I am sure." "Are you?" Marcus smiled, and there was something fierce and determined in the expression. "I have been sure since the third letter." Probably since the first one, if I am being honest with myself. Yes, I am sure. They spent the rest of the day preparing. Marcus packed his most essential belongings, tools, clothing, some food stores, the money he had saved. He loaded his horse and his 2 best sheep dogs, made arrangements in his mind for the livestock he would have to leave behind. Grisha returned to her cottage under cover of dusk and did the same, packing light, but taking the letters Marcus had sent her, bundled and tied with string. She could not bear to leave them behind. Rakkar appeared as she was finishing, materializing out of the growing darkness like a ghost. "The war band leaves tomorrow at dawn," he said without preamble. "They plan to burn the human's farm and kill him if he resists. You need to be gone before then." "Thank you," Grisha wrote. Then, because this might be the last time she saw her brother, "I am sorry." Rakkar pulled her into a fierce hug. "Be safe, sister, be happy. That is all I ask." Grisha met Marcus at the boulder as true night fell. He had his horse loaded, his dogs at his heels, determination in his eyes. She carried her pack and her weapons, ready for whatever came next. "Where do we go?" he asked. Grisha pulled out a map she had taken from her cottage, one that showed the wider region. She pointed to an area far to the north, beyond both orc and human territories, where the maps showed only wilderness and the notation unclaimed lands. "There," she wrote. "We start over there." They traveled through the night, moving as quickly as they dared while keeping quiet. The dogs ranged ahead, alert for danger. The horse plodded steadily under its load, and Grisha walked beside Marcus, silent still but no longer alone. Dawn found them miles from the border, hidden in a dense forest. They made camp in a small clearing, and Marcus built a tiny fire to make tea. He handed Grisha a cup and sat beside her on a fallen log. 23 days, he said quietly. You were supposed to have 23 more days of silence. Grisha shrugged. She pulled out parchment and wrote, "Some things are more important than vows. You are one of them." Marcus read the note and shook his head, but he was smiling. "You are going to break it laughing, you know." Grisha tilted her head in question. "Your silence," Marcus clarified. "I have been thinking about it. You are so serious, so determined to see this vow through properly. But you have a sense of humor, I know this from your letters. And I think when you finally speak again, it is not going to be for something dramatic or profound. It is going to be because I make you laugh." Grisha considered this and then wrote, "That would be fitting. I have done everything else about this vow wrong. Why not end it with laughter instead of ceremony?" They rested for a few hours, then moved on. The pattern repeated for days: travel, rest, travel. They headed north into increasingly wild country, following old game trails and avoiding settlements. Marcus proved to be good company on the road, telling stories to fill the silence, pointing out interesting plants or animal tracks. Grisha listened and watched, and occasionally wrote responses when they stopped to rest. On the 5th day, Marcus told her a story about his early days on the farm, when he had tried to shear a sheep by himself for the first time. "The damned thing wrestled me into the mud," he said, his eyes bright with remembered embarrassment. "I was covered head to toe in filth, and the sheep just walked away with its full fleece like it had won a victory. My neighbor found me like that and laughed so hard I thought he might die. Then he showed me the proper way to hold the sheep so it could not fight back. I felt like the biggest fool in the kingdom." He demonstrated the wrestling match, acting out both his own fumbling attempts and the sheep's victorious escape with such commitment that Grisha found herself genuinely entertained. He threw himself to the ground in imitation of his final humiliating defeat, sprawled dramatically in the dirt with his arms and legs akimbo. And Grisha laughed. It started as a snort, an involuntary sound she tried to catch, but it was too late. The laughter bubbled up from her chest, spilling out in great gasping waves. She laughed at the image of Marcus wrestling a sheep, at his theatrical reenactment, at the absurdity of their whole situation. She laughed because she had been silent for over 11 months, and the first sound she made was going to be laughter, which was either perfect or terrible or both. Marcus sat up from his dramatic sprawl, his eyes wide. Grisha! She could not stop laughing. Weeks of tension, months of silence, all of it came out in helpless giggles. And then, when she finally caught her breath, she said the first words she had spoken in nearly a year. "You lost a fight to a sheep." Her voice was hoarse from disuse, cracking slightly on the words, but it was her voice. She was speaking. Marcus stared at her for a long moment. Then he started laughing too, great rolling waves of mirth that matched hers. They laughed together until they were both breathless, until Grisha's sides hurt and tears streamed down her green cheeks. When the laughter finally subsided, they sat across from each other in the forest clearing, both breathing hard, both grinning like fools. "Hello," Marcus said softly. "It is good to finally hear you." "Hello," Grisha replied, and her voice was steadier now. "It is good to finally speak to you." Worth breaking your vow, Grisha considered this. She thought about the young soldiers she had killed, about the year of silence she had sworn to honor them. She thought about the 10.5 months she had completed, about the penance she had paid in isolation and contemplation. She thought about the choice she had made to leave early, to protect Marcus, to choose life over ceremony. "Yes," she said simply. "Some vows are meant to be broken when something more important comes along. You are more important." Marcus moved closer, close enough that their knees touched. "I need you to understand what you have given up for me. Your clan, your home, your honor in their eyes, that is not a small thing." "I know," Grisha said, "but I also know what I have gained, freedom to make my own choices, a future that is not defined by old hatreds. You." She paused, then added with characteristic bluntness, "Also, you are going to teach me how to properly shear a sheep so I do not embarrass myself the way you did." Marcus laughed again, softer this time. "I will teach you everything I know about farming. And you can teach me whatever you want: fighting, tracking, how to survive in the wilderness without looking like a fool." "That last one might take a while," Grisha said, but she was smiling. They traveled for 2 more weeks, moving steadily north into the unclaimed lands. The territory was beautiful in a wild way: dense forests, clear streams, mountains in the distance. They saw no signs of settlement, no evidence that either orcs or humans had claimed this region. It was perfect for 2 people who wanted to disappear. Eventually they found a valley with good water, fertile soil, and natural shelter. A half-collapsed stone structure stood at one end of the valley, the remnants of some long-ago settlement. With work, it could be made livable. "This could be home," Marcus said, surveying the valley with a practical eye. "We would have to build up the shelter, clear land for planting, establish defenses, but it is possible." "Then let us make it possible," Grisha said. They set to work. Marcus knew farming and construction. Grisha knew hunting and wilderness survival. Together, they made a formidable team. They rebuilt the stone structure into a solid cottage, larger than either of their previous homes. They cleared land and planted a late summer garden, using seeds Marcus had brought. They hunted and fished and preserved food for the coming winter. They worked from dawn to dusk, and every evening they sat by their fire and really talked, making up for the months of written correspondence with hours of conversation. Grisha told Marcus stories about her clan, about growing up orc in a world that feared and hated her people. She told him about her parents, about her brother Rakkar, about the friends she had left behind. She told him about the battles she had fought, the lives she had taken, the weight of warrior culture on someone who had never quite fit its mold. Marcus told her about his childhood, about losing his parents, about the army and the slow realization that he was fighting for causes he did not believe in. He told her about choosing isolation over integration, about the loneliness that had defined his life until she had appeared across the stream. "I thought I wanted to be alone," he admitted one evening as they sat watching the stars. "I thought isolation was freedom, but I was wrong. Freedom is choosing who you want to be with, not just running away from everyone." "I thought my vow of silence would bring me peace," Grisha replied. "I thought if I just stopped talking, stopped participating, I could somehow erase what I had done. But silence did not erase anything. It just gave me time to think, and what I thought about increasingly was you." Marcus reached for her hand and she let him take it. They had been physically close during their travels, necessity demanding that they share warmth and space. But this was different. This was choice. "Grisha," Marcus said carefully, "I know we have never discussed what this is between us. I called it a courtship in my letters, but that was presumptuous. I want you to know that you do not owe me anything. You have already given up so much to be here. If you want this to be a partnership of survival, of friendship, I will accept that. But if you want more—" He trailed off, uncharacteristically uncertain. Grisha turned to face him fully. In the firelight, his face was all angles and shadows, familiar now in a way that made her chest ache. She had memorized his features through months of stolen meetings and weeks of travel. She knew the scar on his chin, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the exact shade of his hair. "I want more," she said simply. "I want everything. I want to build a life here with you, not just survive but actually live. I want mornings where we work together and evenings where we sit like this. I want to know you in every possible way. I want more." Marcus closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them, they were bright with something that might have been tears. "I was hoping you would say that." He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. Grisha did not want. She met him halfway, and their first kiss was soft and tentative and perfect. It tasted like wood smoke and possibility. When they pulled apart, Grisha rested her forehead against his. "This is going to be complicated, you know. We are from different peoples. We do not even know if we can actually make a life together long term." "Nothing worth doing is ever simple," Marcus replied. "And I would rather have a complicated life with you than a simple one without you." Summer faded into autumn, and the valley transformed into golds and reds. Grisha and Marcus worked steadily on their homestead, preparing for winter. The cottage was solid now, with a good roof and a large fireplace. They had stores of food, a secure shelter for the horse and dogs, and defenses in case of predators or unwanted visitors. They also had each other, which made the work feel less like drudgery and more like building something meaningful. They fell into comfortable rhythms, Grisha hunting in the mornings while Marcus tended the garden, both of them working on construction projects in the afternoons. Evenings spent cooking and talking and gradually learning the contours of a relationship that defied all conventional boundaries. One evening in late autumn, as the first frost touched the valley, Marcus pulled something from his pack. It was a small carved wooden box, the craftsmanship simple but careful. "I made this over the past few weeks," he said, handing it to Grisha. "It is probably not as nice as what your clan's artisans could make, but I wanted you to have something." Grisha opened the box to find the letters she had written to him, neatly bundled alongside his letters to her. Both sets preserved, both clearly treasured. "You kept mine," she said softly. "Every single one," Marcus confirmed. "They were too important to leave behind. I thought we could keep them together now." A record of how this started. Grisha looked at the letters, at the months of correspondence that had led them to this moment. She thought about the woman who had written those first cautious replies, who had been so deep in silence and isolation that a letter from a stranger had felt like a lifeline. She thought about how far she had come, how much she had changed. "I love you," she said, the words coming easily despite never having said them before. "I did not put that in the letters because it seemed too dangerous to write down. But I love you, Marcus Aldrich. I think I have loved you since the letter where you told me about trapping yourself in your root cellar." Marcus laughed, that wonderful warm sound she had heard so often over the past weeks. "I love you too, Grisha. I probably loved you from the first letter, the one where you were so brutally honest about killing my countrymen. You could have lied or softened the truth, but you did not. I fell in love with your honesty." He pulled her close, and they sat by the fire holding each other while the stars wheeled overhead and the frost painted patterns on the windows. Outside, the dogs dozed by the door and the horse shifted in its shelter, and the valley that would be their home settled into winter quiet. Winter arrived with snow and cold, but the cottage proved warm and secure. Grisha and Marcus spent the long dark months working on indoor projects. Marcus carved furniture while Grisha cured hides and made clothing. They read books aloud to each other, Marcus's voice bringing stories to life while Grisha listened and mended or cooked. They talked through plans for spring planting, for expanding the homestead, for the life they were building together. They also learned each other in deeper ways. Marcus had nightmares about his time as a soldier, and Grisha would wake him gently and hold him while he remembered where he was. Grisha had moments of deep grief for the clan she had left behind, and Marcus would listen while she talked through her feelings or sit in supportive silence when words failed. They learned each other's wounds and how to tend them, learned that healing was not a solitary process but something that could be shared. One deep winter evening, Marcus said, "I want to marry you." Grisha looked up from the leather she was working. "Marry me? How would that even work?" "I am an orc. You are human. There is no priest or elder who would officiate such a union." "Then we officiate it ourselves," Marcus said firmly. "We write our own vows, we exchange our own promises. We do not need anyone's approval to commit to each other." Grisha considered this. Marriage had always been a communal affair in orc culture, something that involved the whole clan, that tied families together in complex webs of obligation and honor. But she was not part of her clan anymore. She and Marcus existed outside the normal structures of both their peoples, which meant they were free to create their own traditions. "All right," she said. "Yes, let us marry ourselves." They chose the first day of spring for their wedding. The snow had mostly melted, and the valley was alive with the sounds of birds returning and streams running with melt water. Grisha wore her best leather clothing, decorated with careful beadwork she had done over the winter. Marcus wore clean wool and linen, his hair neatly trimmed, his face serious with the weight of what they were about to do. They stood in front of the cottage they had built together. The valley spread out around them, completely alone except for each other and the dogs. There was no audience, no officiant, no ceremony beyond what they created in the moment. Marcus spoke first. "Grisha, I vow to stand with you for the rest of my life. I vow to work beside you, to support you in whatever you need, to honor the sacrifices you made to be here. I vow to love you in good times and difficult ones, to choose you every day, to build a life with you that is worth the risks we have taken. You are my partner, my love, my home. This I promise." Grisha felt tears prick her eyes. When she spoke, her voice was steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. "Marcus, I vow to stand with you for the rest of my life. I vow to share this land and this work, to be honest even when it is hard, to honor the courage it took for you to reach out across impossible boundaries." I vow to love you in times of plenty and times of hardship, to choose you every day, to create a future that neither of our peoples could imagine. You are my partner, my love, my home. This I promise." They had no rings, but Marcus had carved 2 matching wooden bands over the winter. He slipped one onto Grisha's finger and she slipped the other onto his. The wood was smooth and warm, inlaid with careful designs, orc patterns intertwined with human ones, 2 traditions made into something new. "I declare us married," Marcus said, and there was joy in his voice. "By our own authority and by the only witness that matters, each other." "Married," Grisha agreed, and then she kissed him, long and deep and full of promise. They celebrated their wedding with a feast they had prepared together: roasted venison, fresh bread, the first greens from their spring garden, and a bottle of wine Marcus had been saving. They ate and drank and talked about the future, about the children they might have someday, about the life they would continue building in this valley. "Do you ever regret it?" Marcus asked as evening fell. "Leaving your clan, breaking your vow, all of it?" Grisha thought about her brother Rakkar, about the friends and family she would likely never see again. She thought about the honor she had abandoned, the warrior culture she had walked away from. She thought about the young soldiers whose deaths had driven her to silence, about the penance she had cut short. "I regret the circumstances that made it necessary," she said slowly. "I regret that our peoples cannot coexist peacefully, that we had to hide and eventually run. I regret that my brother helped us escape and might face consequences for it. But I do not regret choosing you. I do not regret choosing this life. The silence taught me what I needed to learn: that life is precious, that killing has weight, that I needed to think carefully about what I value. And what I value is this: us, the life we are creating together." "I regret nothing," Marcus said simply. "Every choice I made led me to you, even the hard ones, even the mistakes. All of it was worth it." Spring turned to summer and their homestead thrived. The garden produced abundantly, the hunting was good, and the valley proved to be everything they had hoped. They saw no signs of other people, which was both a relief and occasionally lonely. They had each other, but sometimes Grisha missed the bustle of clan life, and Marcus missed having neighbors to trade with. "We could try to find other exiles," Marcus suggested one day. "There must be others like us, people who did not fit with their own kind, who wanted something different. Maybe in a few years we could build a community here." "A community of misfits and outcasts," Grisha said thoughtfully. "Orcs and humans who chose each other over tribal loyalty. It would be difficult. There would be tensions. But possible," Marcus insisted. "We have proven it is possible." Maybe others need to see that, need to know there is an alternative to the old hatreds. It was a dream for the future, something to work toward. For now, they focused on their own little homestead, on making it prosperous and secure. They added to the cottage, building an extra room for future children. They expanded the garden, experimented with different crops, developed trade goods they could eventually sell if they ever made contact with distant settlements, and they were happy. Not in some fairy tale way where everything was perfect, but in the real, messy, complicated way of 2 people who had chosen each other against all odds, and were determined to make that choice worthwhile every single day. By the time autumn arrived again, a full year after they had fled their old lives, Grisha realized she was pregnant. She told Marcus one evening as they sat on the porch of their cottage, watching the sun set over the valley. "I am carrying your child," she said simply, and watched his face transform with joy. "A child," he breathed. "Our child, half orc, half human. They are going to be extraordinary." "They are going to be complicated," Grisha corrected, but she was smiling. "Neither fully orc nor fully human. They will not fit neatly into either world." Then we will teach them that fitting neatly into boxes is overrated, Marcus said firmly. He placed a hand on her still flat stomach, his expression full of wonder. We will teach them that love matters more than tradition, that building bridges matters more than maintaining walls. We will teach them to be proud of all their heritage, both orc and human. We will teach them to shear sheep properly so they do not get wrestled into the mud, Grisha added, and Marcus laughed. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Grisha remained active through the autumn and early winter, though Marcus fussed over her constantly. She tolerated his worrying with good humor, understanding that it came from love rather than any belief that she was fragile. She was an orc woman after all, and orc women had been bearing children in far worse conditions than a comfortable cottage with an attentive partner for generations. Their child was born in late winter, delivered with Marcus's help in the cottage they had built together. The labor was long but uncomplicated, and when Grisha finally held her daughter, she felt a profound sense of rightness. The baby had green-tinged skin, softer than full orc green but definitely not human pale. She had tiny tusks barely visible in her small mouth, pointed ear tips, and her father's brown eyes. "She is perfect," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. "Absolutely perfect." "We should name her," Grisha said. She was exhausted but exhilarated, riding the high of successfully bringing a new life into the world, something that honors both our peoples. They settled on Alina, a human name that worked in Orcish as well. Alina Aldrich, daughter of an orc warrior and a human farmer, born into a valley where no one had lived for generations, heir to a future that neither of her parents' peoples could have imagined. As Grisha held her daughter and Marcus held them both, she thought about the journey that had brought them here. A year of silence, months of secret letters, a desperate flight into the wilderness. All of it had led to this moment, to this tiny family in this hidden valley. "Do you think anyone will ever find us?" Marcus asked quietly as though reading her thoughts. "Maybe," Grisha said. "Someday, perhaps, but by then we will be established strong. We will have built something worth defending. And maybe, if we are very lucky, whoever finds us will see what we have created and realize that there is another way to live." "A community of misfits," Marcus murmured, echoing their earlier conversation. "Starting with us." "Starting with us," Grisha agreed. The years that followed were full and rich. Alina grew into a bright, curious child who inherited her mother's strength and her father's gentle humor. 2 more children followed, a son named Thomas with his father's coloring but his mother's build, and another daughter named Sarah who looked almost fully human except for the pointed tips of her ears. The homestead expanded and prospered. Marcus and Grisha became experts at hybrid farming that combined human agricultural techniques with orc wilderness knowledge. They produced more than they needed, which they stored against harder times, and eventually began trading with distant settlements, carefully, always maintaining their privacy. Other exiles did find them, slowly over the years. A human woman fleeing an abusive marriage, an orc man who had refused to participate in a raid against innocent villagers, a mixed couple like themselves who had been cast out by both their communities. Each arrival was carefully vetted. Each new resident had to prove they were willing to work and to embrace the community's core principles: tolerance, hard work, and the radical idea that people from different backgrounds could build something together. The valley settlement grew to 15 people, then 20, then 30. They built more cottages, cleared more land, established real defenses and trade networks. They created their own traditions, their own governance, their own way of life that borrowed from both orc and human cultures while being entirely their own. Grisha and Marcus became the de facto leaders of this community, not because they sought power, but because they had been first, because they had proven it was possible, because people naturally looked to them for guidance. They settled disputes, mediated conflicts, and always emphasized that what they had built was fragile and precious and worth protecting. On the 10th anniversary of their self-performed wedding, Marcus and Grisha stood on the same spot where they had made their vows. The valley had changed dramatically. Multiple cottages dotted the landscape now. Fields stretched in neat rows. Children of multiple species played together without any sense that this was unusual or wrong. The community they had dreamed of was real. Did you ever imagine this? Marcus asked, gesturing at the thriving settlement. When you were sitting alone in your cottage, writing letters to a stranger? Never, Grisha admitted. I could not imagine anything beyond my own isolation, but you wrote to me anyway. You courted me with letters until I broke my silence laughing, and then we built this. She gestured at the valley, at the community, at the life they had created through sheer, stubborn determination. Best decision I ever made, Marcus said, pulling her close. Writing that first letter. Crossing that stream. Running away with an orc woman I barely knew, all of it. Best decisions of my entire life. Grisha leaned into him, comfortable and content. She thought about the warrior she had been, the woman who had taken a vow of silence because she could not reconcile her actions with her conscience. She thought about the months of letters, the building connection with a human farmer who should have been her enemy. She thought about the choice to break her vow early, to prioritize life over ceremony, to choose love over loyalty to a clan that would have condemned her. I would do it all again, she said quietly. Every hard choice, every sacrifice, I would do it all again to get to this moment. Their children came running then. Alina leading her younger siblings in some elaborate game that involved the dogs, and a great deal of shouting. Other children from the community joined in, a mixed group of humans, orcs and hybrids, all playing together without any consciousness of the boundaries that should have divided them. This is what we are building, Marcus said, watching the children. A future where they do not have to choose between their different heritages, where being mixed is not a curse but a gift, where love matters more than bloodlines. It will not be easy, Grisha cautioned. The old world still exists beyond our valley. Our children will face challenges when they interact with it. People will hate them for what they represent. Then we will teach them to be strong, Marcus said, to be proud, to never be ashamed of who they are or who their parents are. We will teach them that they are not mistakes or abominations, but pioneers of something new and better. As the sun set over their valley, painting the sky in oranges and purples, Grisha thought about the journey that had brought them here. From that first letter to this moment, it had been a path neither of them could have predicted. But it had been the right path, hard as it was, strange as it was. She had broken her vow of silence with laughter, had broken every other rule she had ever been taught, and in the breaking she had found freedom. She had found love. She had found a future worth fighting for. Come on, Marcus said, tugging her hand. The community meal is starting soon, and I believe it is our turn to bring the bread. They walked down to the main gathering area where the community came together each evening to share food and stories. It was a tradition that combined orcish communal living with human social structures, another hybrid creation that belonged entirely to this new culture they were building. As Grisha broke bread with humans and orcs and children who were both and neither, as she listened to Marcus tell a new ridiculous story that had their neighbors laughing, as she watched her children eat and play and simply exist without fear, she felt a deep sense of peace. This was what she had been looking for during her year of silence, though she had not known it at the time. Not forgiveness for past actions, not erasure of mistakes, but the chance to build something better going forward. The chance to create life instead of taking it, to build bridges instead of burning them, to love instead of hate. And it had all started with a letter from a stranger who had been brave enough to reach across an impossible divide, curious enough to wonder about the orc woman who lived alone in a stone cottage, persistent enough to keep writing even when silence was his only answer. Grisha caught Marcus's eye across the gathering, and he smiled at her, warm and familiar and full of the quiet joy that had become the foundation of their life together. She smiled back, thinking about the years ahead, the challenges they would face, the community they would continue building. It would be hard. It would be complicated. It would be absolutely worth it. She had sworn a year of silence and had broken it laughing. She had courted a human farmer through letters and fled into the wilderness with him. She had built a home and a family and a community from nothing but determination and love. And she would do it all again in a heartbeat, because this life, strange and difficult and unprecedented as it was hers, theirs, and it was beautiful. The evening deepened into night, and the gathering continued, full of warmth and laughter and the sound of people who had found each other against all odds learning how to live together. In the valley that had been empty for generations, a new kind of community was taking root, one letter, one laugh, one brave choice at a time. And in the center of it all, an orc woman and a human man sat side by side, their hands intertwined, their children playing nearby, their future uncertain but full of possibility. They had broken every rule to be together, had walked away from everything familiar, had risked everything for a chance at something real. It had been worth it. Every single moment. The story that had begun with desperate isolation and secret letters had become something bigger than either of them had imagined: a community, a family, a new way of living. And it all traced back to one human farmer who had been brave enough to write to a stranger, and one orc warrior who had been willing to read his letters. Some love stories begin with grand gestures or dramatic rescues. This one had begun with words on parchment, with careful correspondence between two people who should have been enemies. And from those simple letters, from that foundation of honest communication and growing trust, had grown something extraordinary. As the stars came out over the valley, and the children were called to bed, and the adults lingered over the last of the evening's warmth, Grisha thought about the letters she still kept in their carved wooden box. Evidence of where they had started, a record of the courtship that had changed everything. She would save those letters for her children, for the community, for anyone who needed proof that impossible things could become possible through persistence and courage and love. She would save them as a reminder that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was reach out to a stranger, that sometimes breaking your vows was an act of honor, that sometimes laughter was the most sacred sound of all. And when her grandchildren asked her someday how this community had begun, how an orc woman and a human man had ended up building a life together against all odds, she would tell them the truth. It started with a letter, grew through months of careful words, and became real the moment she broke her silence laughing at her ridiculous story about wrestling a sheep. Love, she would tell them, could begin in the strangest ways. But once it took root, once you were brave enough to nurture it despite every obstacle, it could grow into something stronger than tradition, more powerful than prejudice, more enduring than fear. That was the lesson of the valley, the story of their community, the truth that had been written in letters and sealed in laughter, and built through years of hard work and unwavering commitment. And it was a truth worth living, worth defending, worth passing down through generations of children who would never have to choose between the different parts of themselves, who would grow up knowing that love was always stronger than hate, that bridges were always better than walls, that the bravest thing you could do was reach across an impossible divide and say hello. The night deepened, and eventually the gathering ended. Marcus and Grisha walked back to their cottage hand in hand, their children already asleep inside with a trusted neighbor watching over them. They stood for a moment on the porch, looking out at the valley that had become their home, at the community that had grown from their single brave choice to love each other despite everything. "No regrets?" Marcus asked, as he sometimes still did after all these years. "None," Grisha replied, as she always did. "This is exactly where I am meant to be." And in the quiet of the valley night, surrounded by a community built on hope and hard work, and the radical idea that love could bridge any divide, that simple truth felt like the most profound victory of all. They had written their own story, one letter at a time, and the ending was happy not because it was easy, but because they had chosen each other and kept choosing each other through every difficulty. That was the real miracle, not that an orc and a human had fallen in love, but that they had built a life together that honored both their peoples while creating something entirely new. Not that she had broken her silence, but that she had broken it with laughter and had kept laughing through all the years that followed. As they went inside to their warm cottage and their sleeping children and their life that had seemed impossible, but had become beautifully, complicatedly real, Grisha offered a silent thanks to the young soldiers she had killed all those years ago. Her silence had been for them, but her choice to break it, to choose life and love and laughter over endless penance, would have honored them too. She hoped they would have approved. She thought they probably would have. And with that thought, she closed the door on the past and turned fully toward the future, a future full of children and community, and Marcus's warm presence beside her. A future that had been written in letters and sealed with laughter and built through determination and love. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything,